All right, we're live. Welcome, everybody, to the Gadfly Show. I'm your host, David Rich. We have a very, very cool guest tonight. Bill, help me pronounce your last name.
Kousoulos.
Kousoulos. Okay, I was going to say Kousoulos, so I'm glad I deferred to you. Bill is, we have a mutual acquaintance in common, Sam Moranto, who was the UFO specialist who's been on the show twice now. Fabulous interviews with he. And Bill is an expert on the Mothman phenomena, which is something, if you've seen that movie, The Mothman, with Richard Gere and Deborah Messing, that gives you kind of more than just kind of, but the story of via the accounts of the people that lived through it. 1967, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. It's a fascinating tale. I mean, and when I found out that the story was based on true accounts, I was like, whoa, okay, that's cool. So, I mean, I did a little bit of research through the years, but it's always it's kind of like lingered in my mind as something really fascinating that I needed to know more about. And so now the universe has brought us together, and that's why you're here. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, how you got involved in this sort of thing in the first place? Because rarely do people like us get involved in merely one of these things out of the genre that it belongs to. We tend to be like more fully involved in the paranormal, the odd, the weird, that kind of thing. The unconventional pursuits of knowledge. So how did you get involved in this in the first place?
I think, David, and first let me step back for a second.
Yeah.
Thank you for allowing me to be on the show.
Yep.
Is my audio okay at this point?
Yeah, you sound like a robot.
Okay, bear with me.
Still sound like a robot.
Do I still sound like a robot?
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Still a robot.
Still a robot. Gosh, I'm not sure what's going on then because we've got the headphones happening.
I mean, I can understand what you're saying, so why don't you go ahead and say your thing, and maybe it will snap out of it eventually. It's kind of a cool effect, actually.
I can guarantee that I'm not a robot, but maybe this has got something to do with the subject material right now.
All right, now you're back.
I was introduced to the Mothman the same way that you were, and that's through the Mothman Prophecies movie. And interestingly enough, it was over 20 years ago. I was, at the time, my ex-wife and I were still married, but barely. And she had picked up a copy of the Mothman Prophecies, which I'd never heard of. And she said, "Hey, I've heard this is a pretty good movie. Do you want to watch it?" I said, "Okay, yeah, let's watch it." And I remember kind of getting into it and paying close attention to it. It's a very very dark kind of a setting, not dark like evil, but more ominous. I mean, you get an overall feeling of foreboding and that there's something really supernatural about the ambiance of the movie. And I remember getting pulled in, watching it, seeing the telephone calls that Richard Gere was receiving and speaking to this entity on the other line of the phone and getting chills, just watching him interact with this thing. Yeah. And then, coming to find out that this whole Mothman Prophecies movie was basically the name of a book that was written by a really prolific paranormal investigator and ufologist by the name of John Keel. So I watched the movie, and at the very end of it, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, at the very end of the movie, it says this is based upon events that happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1967. And at that point, then I was sold. And I thought, this is a really cool movie, but I need to know a little bit more. But then I kind of went on for the next couple of years. As I mentioned, that was my ex-wife. I think we shortly after that had become separated for good and blah, blah, blah. And investigating paranormal stuff wasn't front and center. I had a legal battle to fight for the next few years.
Sure.
So with that being said, within a couple of years after seeing the movie the first time, I went ahead and ordered the book, and I received the paperback book, and I read John Keel's tale of the Mothman Prophecies. And although it's nowhere close to being identical to what the movie is, there are a lot of overlapping themes. Certainly the Mothman itself was one of those. But it goes into all different types of areas that were just fascinating to me.
Yeah. It's like what kind of areas?
Well, for instance, in the movie itself, there are two things that are really highlighted as being the primary foci of the movie. Number one is the Mothman,
Yes.
which is this black winged creature that scares people, doesn't necessarily hurt people, but it's seen by various people within the community over the course of a 13-month time span. In addition to that, there's an entity that presents itself to one of the main characters in the movie that calls itself Indrid Cold. And Indrid Cold is never really clearly defined in the movie,
right?
But it's some type of a presence. It seems very human-like, but not quite. And so there's a character in the movie who is based upon a gentleman who's in Mothman Prophecy's book called Woodrow Derenberger. But in the movie, the character is fictionalized as Gordon Smallwood, which there's a history behind that name too, but we might get into that later on. But the long and short of it is, in the movie, they combine this Indrid Cold character along with the Mothman itself and kind of make them into one plethora of paranormal stuff, when in the book and in various reports that took place in the 60s, they're two entities that are kind of in the same time frame, in the same region in West Virginia, but don't necessarily appear to be directly connected.
Okay, interesting. Can you tell us about those characters?
Absolutely. So the Mothman itself, again, was an entity that was seen by over 100 people. According to Jeff Wamsley, who runs the Mothman Museum, maybe up to 200 people in 1966 and 67. And the very first instance in the Point Pleasant, West Virginia area of the Mothman presenting itself was to a couple of married couples, younger couples. They were teenagers, but they were married couples, the Scarberrys and the Millettes. And they were out kind of cruising around in this area that's north of Point Pleasant by about 10, 11 miles. It's called the McClintock Wildlife Area. It's also referred to as the TNT area, because back in the 1940s, munitions were built there, dynamite, TNT, for the war effort. And it's allegedly built on top of a Native American burial ground as well. So it's kind of steeped in mystery and history of all this business. So as these young couples are out cruising around in this area, on their way out of the TNT area, they notice that there's this black winged creature. Scares them half to death. So they step on the gas, head back towards Point Pleasant at speeds of have been recorded up to 100 miles an hour. And this thing just tracked right with them all the way into town.
Really?
Out of it had glowing red eyes, 10 to 12 foot wingspan, and black as the night, and really scared them half to death. That was the first instance of the Mothman. But there were multiple reports of this thing over that next 13-month span as well, too.
Is there consistency amongst the all the reports?
Yes and no. There are really two different descriptions of what we've come to know as Mothman.
Okay.
And number one is the black winged creature with the glowing red eyes. But really, the first thing that Mothman was called by the area residents wasn't Mothman. They called it the bird, because what some of the people described that they were seeing wasn't necessarily something that was mystical or foreboding or maybe spiritual in nature. They described it as being a big bird. I mean, like you'd never seen Big Bird.
Okay.
So, but those were the two primary descriptions of Mothman, which is really just one of the paranormal oddities that took place during that time. There are a bunch more as well.
I think it would be okay as far as eyewitness accounts to any event goes, to be not exactly 100% corresponded with each event to each other event witness. So I think that the big, huge black bird is perfectly consistent with wings with red eyes and that kind of thing. That's my, again, having studied, some inductive reasoning, I think that's perfectly acceptable.
Sure. And it could very well be. And there were also witnesses that said that it was more of a gray color, and some said it was feathery. Some said that it was leathery. So they did vary from, witness to witness to some degree.
Sure, but okay. And I think the truth of the matter would probably bear out why there were different perspectives on it, perceptions of it. The feather leather thing and the gray black thing could be lighting easily.
And it could be night and day. There were some daytime sightings.
Right, absolutely, for sure. My point is, I'm like, I mean, when you have like truly contradictory eyewitnesses, you usually dismiss it, or at least one or the other. I'm not hearing any like blatant contradictions of this. I'm hearing differences in perspective, which is fine. So that's very cool. All right, so what are these other cool occult type phenomena that happened then? Paranormal. Sorry.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's not really spoken to a lot in conversations about Mothman is the fact that that was only one manifestation of paranormal phenomena that took place during that time. Another one of the very prominent ones, frankly, was UFOs. There were UFOs seen up and down the Ohio River for that same time span. So for 13 months, UFOs, lights in the sky, they were really just as predominant, if not more so, even than the Mothman sightings. So that's one instance. Another one would be Indrid Cold.
Yeah.
Indrid Cold was an entity, an alleged spaceman who presented himself to Woodrow Derenberger, who was out basically coming home after being out and about in his work van doing his job. And he had seen this vehicle was pulling up behind him very rapidly, thought it was a car or a truck, but it kind of went around him and up and above him and then stopped in the middle of the road. And the way that he described it was, it looked like a teapot that was on its side. So it wasn't any kind of a structure or a vehicle or any type of a thing that he was really familiar with. And as this thing landed, this entity got out of the spaceship, teapot, whatever you want to call it, and basically began telepathing to Woodrow Derenberger, communicating without using words.
Right.
And so the two of them had this ongoing dialogue. And after a few minutes of time, and Woody is, terrified as this is going on.
Oh, sure.
This Indrid Cold entity said, "I'll see you again. I'll see you in time," and then took off. So he was gone. Woody goes home to his wife that night. He's obviously shaken, but he doesn't really want to talk about it. His wife makes him tell her what happened and what was wrong with him. So he described the whole thing to his wife, and she said to him, "Do you think you're going to see this Mr. Cold again?" And he said, "I don't want to, but I think I'm going to." And so as the story goes, Indrid Cold and some of his colleagues, family members, cohorts, whatever you want to call them, would show up at different times on Woody's property. And it became so legendary within his community, which was not in Point Pleasant, but a different section of West Virginia, the Parkersburg, West Virginia area, that people would show up at night and they would camp out waiting for the spacemen to arrive.
All right. So did he ever see him again?
According to Woody, he did. In fact, he's written a book about his experiences. It's called "With Visitors from Lanulos," and he details some of the things that he did with this Indrid Cold. This is also in the Mothman Prophecies book, but in both Woody's book and the Mothman Prophecies book, and another author by the name of Gray Barker wrote a book called The Silver Bridge. In all those books, there's some section of Woody's experience with this Indrid Cold character, and he allegedly flew to Indrid Cold's home planet, which is a planet that he described as Lanulos. And when they showed up on this planet, Woody had to undress because everybody else was stark naked on the planet. So by wearing clothes, he was out of sorts. So
interesting.
He had to kind of fit in. But he also alleged that Indrid and his colleagues took him to different places. Like they toured over to, I think he said they went to Iraq at one point. I mean, places that are not necessarily what you'd associate with like vacation spots, but
no.
Here you go. Here's Iraq. Here's Argentina, blah, 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 So they made these travels according to Woody as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, I hadn't heard about the going to another planet thing. That's very cool. But a planet of nudists, turns out. Mm-hmm. Okay, free spirits, if you will.
Yeah.
Planet of hippies, which is fine by me. That's very cool. That's really interesting. So what about in the movie? And that's my best reference right now. So I apologize if I'm asking questions about the movie and that's not actually in the books. But The phone calls with the predictions. I mean, it's called the Mothman prophecy for a set of reasons. Can you talk about the predictions?
Absolutely. In fact, that's probably the most interesting
Yeah.
aspect of the whole Mothman mythos to me personally. I think, like I mentioned before, everybody fixates on this black-winged alleged cryptid type being.
Yeah.
To me, the prophecies are the most riveting section of the entire book. So when you see Richard Gere receiving these phone calls from this Indrid Cold entity, what that is really is a combination of different factors that took place in the Mothman Prophecies book. I mean, first, obviously, we have the Mothman. Second, there's this entity named Indrid Cold, but Indrid Cold wasn't making phone calls to John Keel, which is the character that Richard Gere is playing in the movie under the name of John Klein. What the phone calls aspect of things refers to and the prophecies refer to is there is a large section of the Mothman Prophecies book that isn't taking place in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It's taking place in Long Island, New York. See, John Keel was from New York, and he traveled to Point Pleasant to investigate other cases that were going on that were paranormal and stumbled across the Mothman. But when he went back to New York, he was contacted by a radio show host who went by the name J.P. Perro. Her real name was Joanne Ferrano, and she was, I think it was on WBAB, which was the broadcast radio station where she had like an early version of a paranormal talk show where she'd have people that would talk about flying saucers and UFOs and paranormal stuff. She told Keel that she had been contacted by these various individuals, but she wasn't sure if they were human or not. And so what would happen is Keel would get on the phone with Joanne and he'd have conversations with her, and all of a sudden either her voice would change and it would be like she was channeling somebody else through her own vocal cords, or she would literally hand the phone over to this other individual who went by the name Apol, A-P-O-L, pronounced apple, like the fruit. And this was some type of an entity who was either, we don't know, but claimed to be alien or maybe a spiritual entity or what have you, but seemed to know the answers to different things before they happened. And Keel actually got wind of an assassination attempt that was going to take place to the Pope at the time. And that assassination attempt did occur, but the Pope was not injured. But also Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King.
No,
he was given prophecies of both of their murders. In fact, he tried to reach Dr. Martin Luther King to warn him about this, but King was so insulated by his own people that he was never able to get through to him. In fact, the entity Apple told Keel that this was going to happen on, I believe he predicted February 4th. And I think the assassination took place on April 4th. So, yeah, I mean, the date was
not bad.
Yeah, except the 2 months off. So, I mean, he kept receiving all these different kind of blurred, images of something that might be happening. Sometimes they were really close to being dead on. Other times they were nowhere close to reality whatsoever.
Oh, interesting. Wow, that's wild. I never heard that. So what are the names of these books? I need to read these.
Well, the first one that I would really want to recommend that you might get familiar with would be the Mothman Prophecies. It's the same title as the movie is.
Right.
So that would be the first one, and that's by John Keel. Keel also published more on just that, not just that topic, but also he did a voluminous amount of work, books that he published, one of them called Operation Trojan Horse, which actually predated the Mothman Prophecies by about 5 years. So that's his study into UFOs and things of that nature.
Oh, cool.
He also has a follow-up to the Mothman Prophecies, which was supposed to be part of the Mothman Prophecies, but it got a little bit too far out there and it made the book too long, so it was edited out. He took some of the stuff that was edited out and then added to it a bit. That book is called The Eighth Tower. So that's where he gets into what he calls his mind-bending philosophy about the nature of all things paranormal, and the nature of reality. It's a fascinating book also.
Oh, I did. I mean,
I could go on and on, but we'd be on all night talking about just that.
I want just a little more of that last book because I have a philosophy degree and obviously I'm into the paranormal. So that's like that book was written for me. So give me like a 2-minute synopsis.
So the eighth tower, basically the premise behind the eighth tower is that Keel says that he believes that there are different levels of existence.
Sure.
And he refers to like the higher power or whatever this like psi plasma might be. He refers to it as the super spectrum. So from this super spectrum comes all these paranormal manifestations, like we talked about from the Mothman. You know, the Mothman, Indrid Cold, Apol, the prophecies, all that business, but also all these other things that we would consider to be normal. But they're basically like the etheric realm where things are like pre-manifested before we are able to tangibly perceive them with our senses, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. You have the rebel forms, and you have the astral plane, which is the one you're describing, actually. I would use the phrase astral plane instead of the ethereal realm. Same thing. Sure. And then you have experience thereof, and that's when it becomes real to you or to whomever. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, he also talks, David, about the way that he kind of perceives our perception of reality, and he correlates that to what we would call frequencies. So let's say you and I are dialed into a certain frequency, but there's other spiritual activity, there are other energies, there are other things that are transpiring that are beyond our perceptive faculties, but they're still happening. Doesn't make them any less real to us. They're just not as tangible to us.
Right, because they're probably either a lower or higher frequency, something that we can't perceive through our senses.
Right.
That's where the mind and the inner world comes into play. No, that's spot on. Very cool. Very cool. All right. The eighth power. What are the first seven?
The first seven he doesn't go into and really differentiate them from the next. I wish I could tell you that. I'm not nearly as well, and I'm not really as well versed with the eighth power as I am the Mothman prophecies.
Of course. Okay. So back to the Mothman prophecy. It turns out you and your wife visited Pleasant Prairie and met some of the people that were there at the time of these phenomena, right?
We have. Yeah, we have.
Do tell.
Going back to 2016, I had taken a new role in the company that I was previously employed with.
Okay.
And as with any new job, you get really immersed in it. It's hard to take time away from it because you need to kind of establish yourself and do the things you need to do for your routine. So we hadn't taken a vacation in a while. So it'd been a couple of years since we'd really gotten out and done anything super adventurous. So Jackie asked me, she said, we need to go on vacation. What would you like to do? Where would you like to go? And so I got to thinking about it, and I thought of a destination that I was always interested in, but didn't know that I'd ever really get to. And I said, why don't we go to Point Pleasant, West Virginia? Let's do that. Because by then she and I had been together since 2004. And so she'd been hearing about Mothman and learning about Mothman for the last dozen years. So it was already a major, thing for her to be super focused on too. So she said, as long as we're going to take this vacation out to Point Pleasant, why don't we scoot down to the Serpent Mound, in southern Ohio first. So we took off, drove all the way down to the Serpent Mound, spent the night there, and then checked the Serpent Mound out. And the very next day got in the car and drove the 150 miles up to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And so we arrived. It was a Friday afternoon. We drove across the Silver Memorial Bridge, which is the one that was erected after the Silver Bridge collapsed in 1967, which we haven't really talked about yet.
No, I'm waiting for that one. Yeah, I'm putting a pin in that on purpose.
We went over the bridge. We went into the town. It was a Friday night. I think it was the 5th of July. And we got to town, and the Mothman Museum was already closed. They closed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We got there about 5:30. So we're kind of bummed out, and we're 500 miles away from home, and we're going to be here for a few days, but what are we going to do? So we were kind of walking around the square, and my wife is a retired postmaster, so she noticed the post office across the street, got pictures of that, wanted to scope it out. And then she said, there's a little diner right across from the Mothman Museum, and there's a little lady who was in the window, and she kind of kept looking out at us. And Jackie said, I think she wants to talk to us. So I said, oh, okay. I mean, we didn't really have another destination to go to besides being in the square. So we went inside, and sure enough, the lady who was running the steakhouse, it was called Harris's Steakhouse, was none other than Carolyn Harris. And Carolyn was somebody who had seen the Men in Black. That's something else we haven't talked about.
Oh, we're
The
getting
Men in Black were also very prominent in Point Pleasant
yes.
in 66 and 67.
Yeah.
And her son and ex-husband both were killed in the bridge collapse. So she had lost her son on the bridge, which she didn't want to really talk about that except to let us know that it had happened. But yeah, she told us all about what it was like in the 60s when this whole Mothman thing was going on.
Had she personally witnessed the Mothman?
She did not.
Okay.
However, her sister did. Her sister is one of the more prominent Mothman witnesses. In fact, after the Scarberrys and the Millettes witnessed Mothman and were chased by Mothman back into town, the next night, her sister, whose name was Marcella Bennett, was actually with her 3-year-old daughter and went out and visited some friends in the TNT area, family members that lived out there. And when they arrived there and were waiting on the porch, all of a sudden, this gray being was on the porch, like right in front of her, almost like it was confronting her, not flying, but standing still. Mortified her. She dropped her daughter. She collapsed on top of her daughter. She was paralyzed with fear. And she's one of the more prolific Mothman witnesses. So Carolyn didn't get a chance to see Mothman, but Marcella did. We didn't meet Marcella. She had passed away before we visited there.
Okay, I was going to ask like about how old was where was this? I'm sorry, what was her name?
Well, Carolyn, who is the person who owned the steakhouse.
Yeah, how old was when you met her?
She was probably 74.
I was going to say probably in her 70s.
Yeah, 74 in 2016.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Any local lore meandering about the town? I mean, did you meet anybody else who? I'm assuming you stayed a couple days and you went to the museum eventually.
Well, we went to the Mothman Museum the next day.
Okay.
We went back to Carolyn's Steakhouse every day that we were in town. So 4 or 5 days in a row.
Oh, that's fabulous.
We went there. We met a gentleman by the name of Mark Griffith. We've become friends with him. I correspond with him at least weekly, if not daily sometimes, over Messenger, Facebook Messenger, and on the phone. So we met him. He was not an experiencer. But we also met his half-sister, Lynn Robinson. And Lynn is the 7th generation granddaughter of Chief Cornstalk. Chief Cornstalk, allegedly, according to legend anyhow, which is highly disputed, but he may be responsible for the Mothman by uttering a curse as he was murdered by settlers in a border dispute back in 1774, I believe it was.
Wow. Okay. So there is an origin story to the Mothman.
There is, but it's highly suspicious. In fact,
why is it suspicious? Just the history of it?
I can tell you this much. When we asked Lynn about whether or not her great-great-great-great-grandfather had cursed the land, she said absolutely not. And we said, well, how can you know that? She said, because no native would ever curse the land. The land is sacred.
That's okay.
Natives. And there's no way that he would have done that. In fact, in what I've heard in terms of the way that he was murdered, there wouldn't have been time for him to utter some type of a curse. He was basically shot at point blank range and wouldn't have had time to respond in that fashion. But it's become part of the legend. So that's part of the lore. Any
iteration of the legend that it's actually him? Back with for a revenge or something?
You think I would have heard that before, because that's a very interesting angle. But this is the first time I've ever heard that. That Chief Cornstalk himself could be Mothman.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Okay.
I've never heard that.
All right. Well, that's cool.
Maybe it's a skinwalker. Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, it's just, I'm just imagining, I like that idea that a Native American wouldn't curse the land. They loved the land. They felt like they were one with the land. It's the last thing they would do. But I would imagine he would be pretty pissed off from being assassinated by settlers, by white people. And they definitely had a lot of spiritual and paranormal power. Indian tribes, no doubt. So
they know how to run the tables in ways that we don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we'll have you on again. We'll talk about the political downtrodden and how we just screwed up everything in this country. Anyway, so I'm just kidding. Okay, that's very interesting. So that's a possible origin story. Again, possible different iterations of that. Let's talk about the Men in Black.
So the Men in Black, there were various reports of the Men in Black. Obviously, Carolyn Harris told us that she had seen them and she thought they were government men. She didn't think that they were anything paranormal in nature.
Does she remember them walking around town?
She does. Yeah,
She
because
saw them.
Carolyn, if she was 74 in 2016,
Right.
when the bridge collapsed, that would have been 50 years prior. So she would have been 70. She would have been 20, 24, 25 years old.
Right.
So she was a fully grown adult by then. She did remember them. She did see them.
She did see them.
Yes.
Did she encounter them personally? Did she talk to them?
I don't remember her saying that she actually talked to them.
I think you probably remember that if she did, because from there you would have asked her what they said. So.
If anything, I mean, the people in West Virginia in that area are very, very conservative. And if they felt they were government, then they would have respected their boundaries and they wouldn't have been approaching them.
Interesting. Okay. But like any tale tells about people that did in fact talk to them, didn't they go out to people's houses and like knock on doors and talk to people?
There has been talk about that. There was one individual by the name of Connie Carpenter. And Connie Carpenter was a late teen, and she had witnessed Mothman during the day. She's one of the ones that actually saw it during the day when she was coming home from a church service. And within the next day or so, she was approached by a late model vehicle in absolutely pristine showroom repair. I mean, it was perfect. It was, I don't know, 10 years old, but it was a perfect car, like it had just rolled out of the showroom. And a guy asked her from the passenger door for directions. And as she leaned in, he grabbed her by the arm and tried to get her into the car.
Oops.
And so this was another, what we would refer to as a Man in Black instance. She broke free. She went back to her apartment. She locked the door, didn't go out for several days, and really didn't talk about the instance at all. In fact, in different documentaries that have come out that speak about the Mothman in general, I want to say her husband, who was her boyfriend at the time, talks about how she wouldn't discuss it at all. And there was an instance of a letter made its way underneath her door within a day or two after she'd broken free from this Man in Black. And on the letter, it said, "Be careful, we can get you yet."
Ooh.
So there was a latent threat. I mean, a very direct threat in this letter that she received. So she was another one who had several instances of Men in Black was Connie Carpenter's aunt. Connie's aunt was a lady by the name of Mary Hyre. And in the Mothman Prophecies movie that you've seen, the character that most closely corresponds to Mary Hyre is the policeman, and her name is Connie.
Okay.
She partners up with Richard Gere.
Yeah.
And they play the John Keel, Mary Hyre pair, even though Mary Hyre wasn't a police officer. She was a newspaper reporter. In fact, she was referred to as the local stringer. So if you wanted to know something that was going on in the Point Pleasant area, she was the person to talk to.
Did she write about it at the time?
She wrote numerous articles that were published in the Athens, Ohio Messenger.
Oh, wow.
And in various newspapers. Yeah, so she was published very widely on it. In fact, at the Mothman Museum, Jeff Wamsley, the owner of the museum, has all kinds of original copies of newspaper articles that spoke about the Mothman. They were written by Mary Hyre. They were about the big bird, all the stuff that was going on. They're under, plastic now that you can actually take a look at the originals. But she also reported several visits from really goofy characters that came into her office. And this is where we kind of draw the line between Carolyn's description of the government men and Mary Hyre's description of the really odd, possibly paranormal or alien type. There was a guy who came into her office late at night, very, very short. And I think they said that he was probably 4'11", 5 feet tall, tiny little guy, big Coke bottle bottom glasses, didn't look like he was quite put together the way that normal folks would, and didn't seem to have any grasp on reality. he walked into her office and said, "What would you do if people told you to stop writing about UFOs?" Because a lot of what Mary reported on wasn't just Mothman, it was on UFOs. But this guy actually said, "Hey, what if somebody told you to not write about UFOs?" And she looked at him and she said, "Well, I'd tell them to go to hell." It meaning basically, "Hey, come on, it's on. You're not going to intimidate me." Well, then later on, after this instance, during the same correspondence, the same conversation, what happened next was this guy kept staring at her. Before she knew it, he had leaned way in and almost was hypnotizing her with his eyes. It was really just a very bizarre situation. So that was another thing that had taken place. Really strange Man in Black type of appearance, totally different than Carolyn's experience.
Okay. Now in this museum, you said they have those articles in like laminated, preserved so you can read them. That's very cool. Does the museum have that letter of threat? They just
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that, please?
Does the museum have that threatening letter?
If it does, I haven't seen it, so my gut tells me no.
What kind of stuff was in the museum?
They've got all kinds of really neat stuff in the museum. Besides the newspaper articles and things of that nature, they also have, a tremendous gift shop. They do a wonderful sweatshirt and T-shirt business out of the museum. But they have actually, and here's a sad part of the story I haven't told you yet. After we met Carolyn, we had intended to go back and visit her again. She'd given us her phone numbers, but at Christmas time, just a few months later, she had a heart attack and passed away. Yeah. Which was really sad. She was a lady that we fell in love with. It's like she was a long lost relative. So in the museum, they have some of the bar stools and the countertop and the Coke machine and some of the signs that were on the wall in a special area that's dedicated to Carolyn Harris. Okay. So that's in a back room there also. They have numerous books, that were published by John Keel and by other authors who have written on the topic. Jeff Wamsley's written a few books. His books are there as well too. But just all kinds of really neat memorabilia from the movie is also in there. In fact, the telephone that Richard Gere was talking to Indrid Cold on is in there.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and then they've got like miniatures of the Silver Bridge and just different figurines of Men in Black and depictions of Mothman and things of that nature. It's really a neat place.
Now, obviously, the movie is set in Point Pleasant. Was it filmed there, or was any of it filmed there?
The movie was not filmed in Point Pleasant. The setting of the movie is allegedly Point Pleasant, but it takes place in the filming took place in a town called Kittanning, Pennsylvania, which I want to say is about 75 or maybe 100 miles east of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And it was a good setting for the movie, but it's not historically accurate.
Right, and movies tend to do that, or TV shows, that kind of thing.
I'd actually heard, and I don't know that there's truth to this or not, but some of the area residents had claimed that Richard Gere was too good to stay in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, so he went someplace where they had a nicer hotel. I've heard that. I don't know that I buy that. But
I don't know if I buy that either. He's a practicing Buddhist. He's supposed to be a very modest and humble man. Anyway, but maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, so I just have a hard time finding a Buddhist to be arrogant. Anyway, okay, very cool. So let's talk about the bridge. What happened there? And
sure.
Go ahead.
So, what I was going to say was, as all this stuff was going on, the Men in Black, the lights in the sky, all the other various paranormal phenomena that was going on, there was a general sense that this was all leading to something that was not going to be pretty. Nobody really seemed to know what it was, though. In fact, at one point, Keel received a message from this APOL entity, basically telling him that there was going to be a chemical plant explosion. And you see that mirrored in the movie as well. So he was trying to identify where this explosion was going to take place, but nothing ever exploded. It wasn't anything of that nature. So what happened was on December 15th of 1967, 4 minutes after 5, 5:04 p.m., the Silver Bridge, which was a 39-year-old construction built by what was known as I-bar construction. So not a suspension bridge, but really a very rigid built bridge that spanned the Ohio River between Kanawha, Ohio, and Point Pleasant, West Virginia, filled up with traffic. And the lights had a history of going red on both sides, which they refer to as being recalcitrant. And the bridge filled up with all kinds of traffic. There were way more cars on there than there should have been. And as the bridge was filled up, people weren't going anywhere. One of the I-bars, which was one of the things that was constructed with 39 years ago, broke free. And the bridge twisted to the right, dumped a bunch of cars into the river, twisted to the left, removed itself with the rest of the cars, and then collapsed onto the wreckage of the vehicles. It was a horrible, horrible sight. Very cold, very frigid, very, very deep area of the Ohio River. And tragically, 46 people lost their lives in that collapse.
Okay, now that is absolutely terrible. Talk about the number 46, because there's something in the movie about that.
So in the movie, they actually used the number 37.
Right. I thought
it
was 30 something. Okay.
Yeah, 46 had actually passed away in the disaster. But in the movie, the character that is kind of Mary Hire, which is played by Laura Linney, the officer Connie.
Yeah.
She has a prophetic dream where she talks about drowning, and she feels that she's drowning, and she doesn't know what she's drowning in, but she makes the comment that it feels good. She's letting go. She's letting herself go, and it felt good. And all she could see was the lights below her, and then she could see presence on the water. And so as she's having this dream about what I just described, she hears a voice in her ear that says, "Wake up, number 37." So this is something that was totally fictionalized or based upon a real dream that Mary Hire had, and that other folks were having some prophetic dreams and visions of these presence floating in the water. And there were 46 who actually did die in the collapse, but in the movie they talk about 36 people died, and she was going to be number 37, except that she was heroically rescued by Richard Gere's character.
Right, I remember that too. Yeah. Okay, so the dream
never happened in reality.
Oh, okay. That's what's okay. They just added that. I mean, that was a pretty intense part too. Maybe they were just trying to illustrate the prophecies, that the predictions that occurred, and that, took some liberties thereof. But okay, is the newspaper lady, is she still alive?
No, unfortunately, Mary Hire passed away in 1970. Very short illness. Wow. She was young. She was like our age. She got sick. She was in the hospital for a period of time, and then she passed away. Okay. So she's been gone for a long, long time.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Interesting. Any pushback, opposition while you were in that town? Like people like, get out of here. We're tired of this. Anything like that?
No. Okay. In fact, quite the opposite. And when we went to the town, we didn't really know what to expect. We were super interested in checking out, the Silver Memorial Bridge, which was erected 2 years, and really, I mean, it was opened up 2 years to the date that the bridge collapsed, the original Silver Bridge. The people there were very humble. They were very approachable. You could talk to them. In fact, like I mentioned, the one guy that we met in Carolyn's restaurant, Mark, he's become a friend of ours. I mean, we've stayed in very regular contact with him. We've been to Point Pleasant every year since then. In fact, we were out there twice last year, and we'll likely be there 3 times this year as well.
That's really neat. Now I want to go there too. How do you drove out there?
Yeah, we've never flown. We've always driven. We live relatively close to where you are. It might even be a little closer to where you're at because we're an hour further west of you.
Yeah, I'm an hour closer to it. Yeah. So how long of a drive was it? From
my door to downtown Point Pleasant, 504 miles. It takes about 11 hours. That's conservative, if you're not really cranking. We'd stop, for, restroom breaks and things like that to get food, what have you. So you figure if you were really cranking, you could probably get there in 8-9 hours.
Oh, wow. That's nothing. I've driven across this country multiple times. By myself.
Oregon. That's a lot. It's a lot farther to Oregon than it is to West Virginia.
Oh yeah, it's like 36-hour drive to Oregon. I did that several times. Wow, that's okay. That's doable. That's feasible. I'm gonna have to put that on my my list of things to do. I just bought a new truck. Maybe I'll just break it in and take it out to Point.
Totally worth it.
Um, is it there's no, is it touristy? I mean, did that movie kind of put the town on the map, if you will? And is it annoying? You ever seen the show Northern Exposure?
Um, I'm familiar with the name, but I don't know.
Okay, it's an early 1990s show. Great show. Set in Sicily, Alaska, filmed in Roslyn, Washington. So when I lived in Portland, it's one of the reasons I moved out to the Pacific Northwest, because it was because of that show. I love that show. Anyway, my friend and I went up to Roslyn, Washington one day and spent like a couple days there. And it was just such a fantastic thing to be a part, to be witness. And they still had some of the buildings and the bar and the stuff from the show. And you're just like, wow, it's just it's awe-inspiring and that kind of thing. Well, my point is that it wasn't touristy at all. It was very legit and real. Did you have that sort of experience in that town, or was it like, I know if you go to like Area 51 places, it's like stupid, like just all like cheesy crap and they're selling and blah 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 blah. What was it like there, as far as the genuineness of it?
Well, it has changed in the 5-6 years we've been going out there,
Okay.
But not a lot. What I can share with you is that when we went out there in 2016, I mean, it was just a wonderful experience for us because we'd never been there. We didn't know what to expect. We were blown away at just how awesome the experience was. Very, very authentic. I mean, there are commercial aspects to it. The museum, is half museum, half commercial, but it's not overly done. I mean, and the people are very, very cool. So
I would want a T-shirt personally.
Oh yeah. And really, the Walmsley family who started the museum have several other businesses in town now, and they're all based around themes of not just Mothman, but also just life in West Virginia. It's a different experience than Northern Illinois or different parts of the country. People still come first, and people are very interested in having conversations with you.
Imagine that.
You. So it's a wonderful experience. I'd recommend it to anybody who's looking for a different kind of a vacation. You have the novelty and the legend, but like I like to tell people, the legend of the Mothman brought us to Point Pleasant. The people bring us back.
Oh, very cool. I like that. It's well said. Very cool. Any besides either aliens or some sort of supernatural force or government agents, any other descriptions or explanations of the Men in Black?
Well, with the Men in Black, I mean, just as I've understood it, and there were different things that Keel had written about in the Mothman prophecies, different instances of Men in Black in different parts of the country. This was a very predominant thing that was happening in the late 60s, apparently. So he had written about them, but they were either, that cross between some type of a spiritual or alien entity or just a government or shadow government type operation.
Is there a theory out there? Is there a consensus with most of the researchers on this phenomena that about the theory of what happened?
Well, as far as the Mothman itself or the bridge going down, or really
let's talk about the Mothman itself. Like, do most people, John Keel and so on, do they think it was whatever?
Well, I can tell you that nobody's really arrived at a definitive answer.
It's hard to do
what it is. However, John Keel referred to what he thought the Mothman, at least at the top of his list for what the Mothman was either a thunderbird in the Native American tradition, like a spiritual / physical interdimensional type being, or if you were to correlate that to more Eastern philosophy and even in the Buddhist pantheon, an image known as the Garuda. And the Garuda is seen as like a protector deity, one that shows up to warn of impending doom or to kind of stabilize people as they're along their own path of personal development.
That's what John Keel thinks. It's one of those. Like the Thunderbird is a Native American spirit.
Correct. And Thunderbird and Garuda, I think, are kind of interchangeable, just different definitions according to different cultures. Right. But they're basically seen as spiritual entities, not necessarily evil, if anything, neutral to good in their purpose for being around.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, even in our, Western culture, the Bible has, angels that can be. I mean, they're God's, minions and stuff, but they can be pretty intense.
Hmm.
And strike fear into people, even though just because of their power, that kind of thing.
I've heard it described as being angelic. I've heard it described as being demonic. I
Right.
don't
Well,
I don't necessarily just subscribe to the negative aspects of what I've heard, because it never harmed anybody, it never hurt anybody.
right. And when you see something that, odd and unfamiliar, you're bound to be scared by it just because it's odd and unfamiliar. And like you said,
Mhm.
ominous. But ominous doesn't mean evil.
I would
By
probably say, in the general consensus, Mothman is seen as a cryptid, an unidentified physical type of a being. That's
do
not really
you,
where I see it, but
what do
that's
you see?
I
What do you
see it
think?
more along that Garuda,
Okay.
Thunderbird, angelic
Okay.
spectrum.
Okay. Have there been any eyewitness accounts since then, or in
There's
any
been
other
all,
areas besides that town?
there have been all kinds of reports. I mean, they come in from all over the country. There's another very prolific author who we've become friends with, by the name of Andy Colvin, and Andy kind of was John Keel's understudy to a certain degree, and he had become friends with Keel in the later years of his life. Interviewed him for some different projects he's done as well too, and he's written voluminously about the Mothman. And now I kind of lost my train of thought. Can you take me back to the question again?
Yeah, and have there been any other eyewitness accounts since 1967,
Oh yes,
or in that town, or any other accounts elsewhere?
all over the place. They're
Okay.
all over the country, if not all over the world. So reports come in all over the place about this. Now I can say that for the last 10 years or so, there's been a rash of sightings that have been documented that allegedly have taken place in the Chicagoland area and around the Lake Michigan area. And
Okay.
I've been privy to some of those reports, to most of those reports. Um, I don't know that I see a correlation between what's allegedly happened in Chicago and what happened in Point Pleasant, but there are certainly all types of assertions. There have been books written about it that have come out the last couple of years.
What happened in Chicago?
Just people are claiming to have seen Mothman in Chicago.
They call it Mothman.
They refer to it as Mothman. Yes.
Now, so this happened recently?
It's been taking place over the course of the last 10 years, predominantly since 2017. The first couple of sightings that were documented and published in books allegedly happened in 2011. And there's a whole backstory to that. That's kind of what brought Sam Moranto and me together, was his investigative research he had done on Mothman in Chicago, and me with the research and familiarity and passion I have for the original Mothman flap of the 1960s. That kind of brought us together. So there have been a couple of them that were documented from 2011, but then fast forward to 2017, a plethora of sightings took place or were documented and published on various websites, and then compiled into a couple books that have been published onto the topic since then. And there have been a few documentaries that have been released, a couple of them notably by Small Town Monsters. One of them came out, I think, in 2019. It was called Terror in the Skies. And that one talked about different manifestations of thunder being type things in Illinois for the course of the last 100 years. And then the second one is called On the Trail of the Lake Michigan Mothman, which talked about some of the alleged sightings that have taken place in the Chicagoland area. And Sam and I were actually featured in that documentary as well.
Wait, what is the documentary called? After the show, I'm gonna go watch it.
It's called On the Trail of the Lake Michigan Mothman. It's
This
by
is
Small Town Monsters.
Small Town Monsters. I've heard of that. Have they done other documentaries that I might have seen?
They do a ton of them. They kick out a number of them every year. They do a nice job.
Okay, I probably, that sounds extremely familiar. I probably seen. I watch a lot of documentaries on the paranormal, so I probably came across them somewhere.
I would really recommend, if you're really interested in the topic, to go back and check out Small Town Monsters, The Mothman of Point Pleasant.
I might have seen that. That's might be where I'm getting it from.
That's very, very well done.
Okay. Because I know that I've seen a documentary on it, other than the movie. Not that the movie's a documentary, but okay, very cool. Small Town Monster. I will definitely check that out, and I can see you and Sam in there. That's cool. So like you actually got you they connected with you, they contacted you to be on the documentary. So are you published? I mean, they must have got your name from somewhere.
Well, they got my name from Sam, and Sam has been pretty connected, I think, with
Yeah,
them.
for
And
sure.
over the course of the last 5 years, as Jackie and I have been visiting Point Pleasant regularly, we've become friends with Jeff Wamsley, who runs the museum. We've become friends with Andy Colvin, who is the author that I was just talking about, who really followed in John Keel's footsteps and has published a lot of his old magazine articles that were lost for decades. So we've become friends with him as well, too. And in the process, over the course of the last 10 years, I decided to go back to graduate school. And as I was working on my education, kind of dovetailed my passion for the paranormal with my passion for psychology, and ended up getting a doctorate in psychology. And we are actually in the midst right now of having conducted research. We've interviewed 11 people who were affected by the Silver Bridge collapse, and some of whom were actually also privy to some of this paranormal activity that happened in the 60s back in West Virginia. So we've interviewed 11 people. I've run it all through systematic scientific analysis to be able to come up with a theory. And now we're building a book around that theory and around that study.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So we're shooting for a publishing date of September of 2022. We have the entire book is outlined right now. We're going to dedicate a chapter to each one of the folks that was interviewed and kind of get the transcriptions in of that. And the whole theme of the book is based upon the growth that the individuals who experienced the bridge disaster, who experienced some of the paranormal phenomena, who went through all the tragedy, but the growth that they went through as a result of having been through that. So individually, collectively, the community of Point Pleasant, we're looking at a scientific theory that's known as post-traumatic growth. Since this is after the trauma, what's the good stuff that came as a result of that? And so we focused on the good things that happened from that time period and from those things that took place in the 60s in West Virginia.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. I'm eagerly awaiting that to come out. For sure, I will definitely. That is right up my alley. I love all the science part of it, what it's about. That's very cool. Very cool. So you say this.
It's a fun project to be involved.
Oh, I bet. I bet.
And I think one of the reasons that they wanted me to be on the documentary as well too, because of the familiarity that I have not only with the Mothman and Point Pleasant and that whole thing, but also the scientific background as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and that's I like that people like myself and yourself are involved in the paranormal because we have actual credibility of rational thinking under our belt. We're not just some wackadoodle who's just interested in weird stuff merely because it's weird stuff. There's something about it. I mean, it is fascinating in and of itself. I mean, it shows a whole different dimension of reality. And it takes us beyond ourselves, which is always a very cool adventure. Impetus for an adventure, for sure. Well, very cool. Well, we're at the end here. The time always flies when I'm having a good conversation. So I would love to have you back on again and talk more about this, and maybe closer to the release of the book, and we can talk about that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And because you're involved in like UFO stuff as well, like Sam, right?
I'm interested, although my laser focus is the whole Mothman phenomenon. It doesn't mean I'm not interested in the rest of the stuff. What it means is I have a day job and there are only so many hours in the day.
Oh, I hear that.
It's difficult to be able to get my arms around everything.
Yeah, no, I wish if I could grow another day, that'd be great. Very cool, very cool. Any last words or anything you'd like to promote, plug, anything else, or just like end up with anything?
Well, yeah, I guess I'd just like to give a shout out to my colleagues, my wife, Jackie Kousoulos, and our associate and partner, Amanda Raber. They're both very integral to the project that we're working on right now. And without them, it wouldn't be happening. So very, very pleased to have them, on board in spirit and in helping us to get this thing done. The Mothman Museum, I recommend anybody who's remotely interested. It's cool. Worth the road trip. You need to check it out. The Wamsley family is so accommodating, so polite, so kind, wonderful, wonderful people. And we can be found, we have a Facebook page and a website, very underutilized, but they are by the name of phenomenologyresearchpartners.com. That's the name of our group, Phenomenology Research Partners. And I can also be found on Facebook as well.
Now, you use the word phenomenology just as like the study of phenomena, or like in the Edmund Husserl sense. Do you know who that is?
Well, it's actually it's more in the scientific sense, actually,
Okay.
because my dissertation and my methodology that I use is qualitative, not quantitative. So we were going to do this as a phenomenological study originally, but because I have more experience with grounded theory, we utilize grounded theory instead. But the whole idea was to be able to use a word that's a good buzzword for paranormal phenomena, but also to tag it with a scientific aspect of phenomenology.
No. Phenomenology is a very cool word for sure. Definitely, theology is the science part, the study of. So that's very cool. There's a famous or somewhat famous philosopher who invented a type of philosophy called phenomenology, and it's different than what you're describing, but it's still very cool. Anyway, very cool. All right, Bill Kousoulos, right? Kousoulos.
You got it.
Got it. Is that Greek? It sounds Greek.
It is Greek. Yep, I'm first generation born in the States.
Are you really? I'm first generation Italian. My mother's from Italy.
Well, we're from the same region then. We're very similar.
Hey, that's beautiful. The Mediterranean. All right, that's right.
Absolutely.
And Sam Moranto, another good Italian guy. We should get to dinner, like find a restaurant and like have dinner together or something.
I'm up for it.
That'd be cool. All right. Well, thank you, Bill, so much for coming on. Seriously, this is such an exciting thing for me. I've just been like, interested in this phenomenon since I saw the movie. I like you said at the end of the movie, you're like, whoa, wait, this is based on real accounts. That's crazy. And it's just, this is a cool opportunity for me to have somebody like you on the show to talk about it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity as well.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning into the Gadfly. I'm your host, David Ricks. Until next time, take care.